Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Crimes and Times. We apologized last week for the technical difficulties. As usual, we don't think it was our fault, but who knows. But we're very lucky that our guests decided to come back and give it another try, and we really appreciate that. As a recap, what we were discussing was the firing of the FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe just hours before he was going to retire and receive his full pension. We want looking at the perspective. Some people think it was cruel and unusual, and some people think it was warranted. And just talking to my colleagues from the Bureau and the Department of Justice, there's different opinions. So with us first tonight is an FBI agent who worked in our Office of Professional Responsibility. He's going to explain what they did or what they do in OPR, how they made the decisions, and then give us his opinion as to whether the firing of then FBI Deputy Director McCabe was warranted and justified. Please welcome Bill Larsh. Bill, nice to see you, buddy. Thanks for coming back.
All right, good talking to you again, Mike. Anytime.
All right. Well, hopefully this time we'll do the trick. Anyway, Bill, give the audience just a little bit history of your experience in our Office of Professional Responsibility and what you did there.
Okay, I can give a little history of OPR. I worked there twice in my career for a total of 4 years. First, I worked there from 1995 to 1997, and then I was in and out of management, and then I came back, I got back into management, and I went back to headquarters, and I worked there again in 2004 and 2005. And OPR, over the years, has gone through a few reorganizations. When I first got there, we were actually attached to the director's office, and OPR was it was an investigative unit investigating allegations of serious misconduct in the FBI. And the adjudication unit was in an entirely different division. It was then called the Personnel Division. I don't really know what it's called now, but it was called the Personnel Summary Unit. And
I think I remember that. Yeah, that sounds right.
In the Personnel Division, they did the adjudication, and we really didn't interact with them at all. It was I remember they had a lock on their door, and nobody could even get in there. So it was all separated. And then after I was there, I guess a year or so, or maybe the last year, the second year I was there, they decided to reorganize the whole thing and make OPR the investigative unit and the adjudication unit all in the inspection division, and that it should be more like it is out in the field where, FBI agents talk to prosecutors, that type of thing. So we all interacted after that. And then when I went back to headquarters in 2004, they had just gone through this, DOJ did a study of OPR, and it's kind of a detailed story as to why they did it, but there were a lot of problems with adjudication. The executive management, senior executive service were tending to get lesser penalties for adjudication as compared to a street agent or other personnel in the FBI that were not the higher ups. But at any rate, the DOJ conducted this report. It was called the Caldwell Commission, and two major things came out of that. They did away with it was an SAC review board, which had been operating up until that time, and during my first tenure there. And what would happen is the people in SES, Senior Executive Service, the SACs and section chiefs and assistant directors or whomever in the higher up management in the FBI, the adjudication unit would give them a punishment that was based on precedent, and it would be similar to what they would give to any other employee. But then the SAC review board would take would look at the case, and they tended in a lot of cases to lessen the punishment for their own executive management. So it seemed to be an unfair practice going on in the FBI.
Right. Let me just clarify for the audience. So, as you said, SES is the Senior Executive Service. One enters that when they reach a level of SAC, which is Special Agent in Charge, what you're referring to, who's the head of the division, or certain other positions at headquarters, such as an inspector or section chief. It's just a certain level of management that you reach, and it's a higher level of highest level of management you can reach in the FBI, the Senior Executive Service. And what you're saying, Bill, is that the SACs, the Special Agent in Charge, had this review committee, and it was found that they were being softer on their own for the same punishment they would give to an agent who did the same thing, an agent on a lower level, right? So right away, as soon as this conversation gets started, you're acknowledging that the politics in the FBI existed, from the moment you were aware of it, of the system,
yeah.
right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the Department of Justice in 2003, I think they implemented a reorganization in 2004, right when I got there. And what they decided to do was they reverted back to separating the adjudication and the investigative units. So when they reorganized, the investigative units stayed within the inspection division, and then they made a new division just for adjudication and separated it from the investigative side. So, they didn't think there should be any collusion or as little interaction as possible. That should all be separated. The case should just be investigated and then go to the adjudication side, and then, they should make their recommendation for punishment or the penalty based on precedent. And so they did that, and so they created an OPR division, and it was just a couple of adjudication units made up of mainly supervisory special agent attorneys. Most of them were attorneys from the FBI that made up that unit, and then it was headed by a Department of Justice executive personnel instead of an FBI person.
What do you think about that, Bill? What do you think about having someone from DOJ? And let me explain to the audience once again. The FBI is a component of the Department of Justice, but on an operational level, we don't respond. I'm sorry, we don't answer to the Department of Justice. The FBI director does answer to the Attorney General, but that's kind of where that hierarchy ends. Out in the field, FBI and DOJ are separate. Agents work separate than the prosecutors, and it's two distinct lines of authority. Just so everyone understands it. So, Bill, how do you feel about that? They put a DOJ person in charge of this internal FBI operation. Appropriate? Not appropriate? Good, bad?
Yeah, it was appropriate, and it was a great idea, because the idea was to make the system fair. So there are no politics involved. It's like an outside person coming into the FBI and in charge of adjudication. So they don't know any of the SACs out in the field or any of the senior executive service. They're not, they don't know them. There's a big good old boy system in the FBI. Everybody knows each other. So,
but Bill, does that bother you? We in the FBI, we always held that. I know that most of the FBI agents didn't like when back in the 90s DOJ got more of an investigative authority into the FBI. We always felt we could police ourselves, and we rise above the politics. But clearly that didn't happen. Does that bother you as a career FBI agent that DOJ and the FBI had to bring in an outsider in to make sure we played straight? That's kind of a bad message there, is it not?
No, it's a good message. There was nothing wrong with it at all.
No, I think it's a bad message. We're acknowledging, though, that FBI may not play fair, that we need an outsider to come in there and kind of clean our house or keep us from needing a house cleaning.
I'm looking at it as good because they fixed it. They fixed something that was broken. It was, in fact, broken in the 90s and the beginning 2000s. In fact, my unit chief, the unit chief that I had in OPR in 1997, he was a great guy. I won't say his name, but he couldn't get out of headquarters because of the politics, because he was in charge of misconduct with regard to the Ruby Ridge, not Ruby Ridge, I'm sorry, it might have been Ruby.
No, probably Ruby Ridge.
Yeah, it was probably Ruby Ridge. Yeah, that was the one where they had a lot of problems with the executive. So he they investigated that case outside of OPR, actually, back in, whenever that was, 1993 or 4, whenever it was. So it was bad for him politically. It ruined his career because he was basically investigating the higher ups in the FBI, and then they resented it. And,
right. And again,
let
me just explain to the public again. When you're unit chief in the headquarters, nobody wants to really work in headquarters. It's one of those positions you get in, you try to get back out to the field. That's just a reality. A unit chief is a mid-level management job that most of us try to avoid. I was fortunate enough to avoid it as I went through the ranks. But the next step is generally assistant special agent in charge of a field office after being unit chief. And what Bill is referring to is to get that position, you have to be selected by the special agent in charge of that office. Again, a certain amount of politics involved there. Even though there's a career board, the special agent in charge gets to make his choice. And if you, as a unit chief of OPR, got in trouble with somebody that the SAC liked or made a decision that the SAC disagreed with, then you're vulnerable to not getting a position because of his personal politics. Did I say that correctly, Bill?
Yeah, that's right. Essentially, his career was over because he'd been passed over for promotion, numerous times after he led that OPR investigation of the mishandling.
Right, and that's what I'm getting at. I understand what you're saying. You're saying it was good that they put DOJ in, they brought an outsider. But what I'm saying is it just troubles me that they had to do that. And it troubles me what you're saying. The reality is that we do have a lot of politics in the FBI and that we needed somebody to come in and clean it up.
Yeah. There's great people in the FBI, but there's enough of them that ruin it, and they can corrupt the system. And I think the system was corrupted.
And that's unfortunate. And I think you and I kind of breaks our heart to have to admit that. But it is what it is.
So this poor unit chief, it got worse for him because I got back in 2004, and I went back there because I knew he was a good friend of mine, and I thought he was going to be there for a while. And I got there, I think, in maybe February 2004, and he retired in March because and he had to get out because unbeknownst to me, he had his career came to a screeching halt anyway. Right. But just prior to that, I think a couple years before, in the fall of 2002, he actually appeared on 60 Minutes and told them about the Ruby Ridge investigation, and that he was retaliated against, and there was a double standard of discipline in the FBI.
Well, if I remember, there was even an investigation of the Ruby Ridge investigation, was there not? Of the initial investigation? Yes. Because that investigation they felt was somewhat corrupted.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it goes on and on. It's so convoluted. So after the broadcast, this guy just suffered all kind of retaliation from executive management in the inspection division and at headquarters. So he just couldn't take it anymore. He quit. Well, he didn't quit, but he retired. He was 50.
All right, so you gave us a good view of some of the problems in there. Let's talk about, just on average, now let's stay away from the McCabe issue for now. An agent gets accused of something inappropriate in the field. I can speak for myself. One of my subordinates, I found out, was having an affair with one of his immediate subordinates, a no-no in the FBI. Again, not the affair itself, but having it with an immediate subordinate. What bothered me was that he didn't just come to me and tell me that, and I could have probably just done some transferring and avoided the whole situation. But he did it. I had to refer to OPR, a guy I liked, someone I trusted. So tell us what would happen then. I send in the complaint. What's the process then from that moment on?
Well, it gets assigned to an agent, and to a supervisor in OPR. Now, sometimes they delegate it out to the field if the field can handle it, if it's a minor issue. But something like your case, they probably if it's something that the field office couldn't handle, probably because of politics too, or just.
Wait, hold on a second. So let's say it was something. Give me an example. What would be a minor offense?
Oh, just a misuse of the car. Somebody got in an accident.
All right, let's say someone misused the car. They picked up, the husband and wife from work, which we're not allowed to do.
Yeah.
A lot of people couldn't understand. You're saying that investigation would go to the field office itself, and who would conduct that investigation?
They give that to a supervisor. I mean, you as the SAC, of course, would just assign that to one of your supervisors to handle it, and then they would do the signed sworn statements. Because it's usually a cut and dry case. The guy got caught misusing the car, and the case, he gives a signed sworn statement, swears to tell the truth. It's under oath, and then he signs the statement. And then if it's all the truth, he's going to get 30 days off probably. It gets sent in.
Right.
Well, actually, I think we were discussing last week about the Douglas factors, where an SAC like yourself would write up either mitigating factors or aggravating factors with regard to the employee that's under investigation.
Right. There's quite a few of them, if I remember. Were there like 17 or 18 of them? There's quite a few, right?
Yeah. There was a whole list of things. Basically, if he's been a good agent and has never been in trouble, then that mitigates the punishment. If he's been a problem for the FBI for the last 10 or 20 years, and he's constantly in trouble, and he's not working his cases properly or not doing what he's supposed to be doing, then those are aggravating circumstances, and he could get a harsher punishment. But
let me ask you a question based on that. Let me ask you, just based on what you said. You pointed out if he's been around for the Bureau a long time, never got in trouble, that would be a mitigating circumstance. Wouldn't that represent the overwhelming majority of members of the SAC, ASAC and above, let's say? Because, one, you have to have a certain amount of seniority, though that changed over the years. As we know, you didn't have to pay your dues as much as time went on. But during the time you and I were there, you had to really pay your dues, spend some time on the street, work your way up the ranks. So if an ASAC, SAC, or above got in trouble, wouldn't it kind of be, maybe we assume that they've been in for a long time and they've had a stellar record, because otherwise they wouldn't be in that position? So wouldn't that in of itself be a mitigating factor?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, that usually if you reach that high in executive management, you generally had a pretty decent career. You've had a stellar career to raise to the rank of to be an SAC. I mean, you haven't fouled up or had serious misconduct in your career if you're getting promoted. You wouldn't get promoted that high if you had.
Right.
So,
so
yeah,
the point is right. So a little, I don't want to say deference to them. It's not in deference to that position, but it's just a recognition of the fact that they have this long career of not having been any problems, and obviously having performed well. That would mitigate something that for a young agent may not get mitigated, right?
True. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's go. So I guess it would be irrespective in terms of punishment who does the investigation, whether it's headquarters or the field office. They make a finding. They say, all right, he did it. All right, whatever the allegation is, not serious. The investigation makes a finding. Where does that finding go? And the SAC gives his. I'm sorry, I get my earpiece here. The SAC gives his recommendation. Look at that. All right, we're going to take a break here. I accidentally cut him off. And hold on here. Hopefully he'll call back in a second. Hi, I'm Michael Tabman, President of DOT Compliance Services. After 24 years in the FBI and 3 years as a police officer, I know how to navigate complex rules and regulations. And I know you're worried about the scammers you've heard about. Don't worry, I've faced much tougher criminals. Allow DOT Compliance Services to handle your compliance matters and keep you on the road making money, not out of service paying steep fines. Give us a call. We've got you back. As a retired FBI agent, I knew you'd call back. When I went to adjust my earpiece, I accidentally cut you off. A little button there.
Oh.
So thank you for.
I'm glad it wasn't my fault.
No, but thank you, and you just proved to the audience just how resourceful a retired FBI agent could be. All right, so let's go back. So what I was saying is, all right, so the allegation comes in. There's an investigation. They say he did it, serious or not. What happens then to that allegation? Now there's been a finding of guilt or whatever it would be. He did it. Where does that go?
Yeah, well, it's going to come back to the investigative unit first, and then we're going to review it, make sure it was a complete investigation. And now and then they might have missed something, and we'd have to send the lead back out to the field.
A little quality control, right?
Interview somebody. Pardon me?
A little quality control.
Yeah,
okay.
But generally, the case is complete, and you just send it to the adjudication unit. and it actually could be in that adjudication unit for a long time. I mean, it could take a year. A lot of guys, if they were of retirement age, they would generally, if it was something fairly serious, they would just retire.
Why would it take that long? Why would it take that long?
Just because of the volume of cases.
So let me ask you a question. You make a point now. So if it makes it out of the adjudication unit in a few months, and I don't know how long McCabe's was in there, but if someone makes it out of adjudication in, let's say, 2-3 months, would that be indication to you that there's maybe a little politics at play there? Why would they be pulling a case so quickly?
Right. There could be politics. Or now there's other cases, on very serious cases, when there is a recommendation to be dismissed, it's not going to sit there. I mean, sometimes you'll see it, and they want to summarily dismiss the person, because it was, I had one case where the guy was a child molester, a support employee, and he finally admitted that he molested a child. So there was a.
Actually, I happen to remember that case. I was in headquarters at the time. I happen to remember that case. Very trouble. All right, so let's go. So the person who's being investigated, they interview that person, correct, the accused, right?
Correct.
And then you said they prepare a written statement, and the accused gets to read that over and sign that, correct?
Yes.
Is that irrespective of whether FBI does the investigation or DOJ or IG does it? Does the DOJ IG also have to give them a written statement for them to review?
I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that they operate that way. I'm not 100% certain, but I think it's a signed sworn statement.
It should be, right?
It should be. I mean, they're operating basically the same way that we would in OPR.
Okay, so we don't know because Andy McCabe was investigated by OIG, so we don't know then, if we're not sure if he was given a statement as to what the OIG was going to be turning in terms of his statements.
Exactly. I don't know that.
Well, that'd be pretty critical. That'd be pretty critical in this case, because he's claiming that he was misunderstood. He had to clarify things. If he didn't, and I saw some agents, on social media saying, "Oh, that can't be. He had a chance to review his statements." But the question is, we don't know if he actually did or not.
No, I'm not certain that he did a signed sworn statement. I'm assuming he did, but now that you're talking about it, I'm not really sure, because they did their cases. We didn't review their cases that came back, because those were generally, major cases that we weren't really involved in, because
right.
For
reasons, I have a feeling he didn't get that signed sworn statement. I can't be sure either, but I have reasons for my suspicion. All right, so he maybe did, maybe didn't. All right, so we have the accusation, the investigate, and during the investigation, now we said when the FBI does it, the person gets to see a statement. When the FBI is investigating, does the person get to present witnesses at that point? Say, hey, you know what? You don't believe me, but go talk to Joe. He was there when it happened. Does he get to do that, and is he guaranteed that right to have witnesses interviewed if the FBI investigates him?
Well, I don't think it's guaranteed. I think if it's logical, if there's something that, we're going to take signed sworn statements, not just from the subject. In fact, you go out and do the investigation, you're going to be interviewing witnesses, with regard, logical witnesses, in any kind of case,
Right, but if he presents a logical witness, if he presents a logical witness, is that due process then that those witnesses should be interviewed?
I mean, if I were doing the case, of course, yeah, I would. Okay. Right. It's just a matter of common sense. If he's saying something in his defense, it's like, well, you need to interview him, because he's going to, tell you this, and it's going to help me in my case. So sure, I would go interview him. I would think any investigator would. We're not out to nail somebody to the cross, so you want to do a full and thorough investigation. And most every agent I worked with, I didn't work with anybody that wasn't conscientious.
Right, so, but again, we don't know if DOJ. We don't know that.
I would assume OIG would operate in that manner.
Okay.
He told them, we don't know, but I would assume, you'll be investigated for something, but you need to talk to this person. But they may, most people that said that, to me, it's like, well, we already interviewed everybody. we interviewed all the people that needed to be interviewed. I mean, some, I can't remember exactly, but, there were some cases where, they wanted us to do something and it just didn't make any sense.
Right.
So,
Okay. But unless I want to put this in perspective because where I'm heading in this conversation. So you interview someone, but like any subject of an investigation, the investigator is going to investigate what they want to investigate, what they feel is logical, right?
Yeah.
So the accused isn't necessarily having a chance at that point to really defend themselves. He can say, "Hey, speak to Joe or consider this," but it really is still up to the investigator to make that decision.
Yes.
And okay, there's a reason I mentioned that. That seems obvious, but there's a reason I'm getting at here. Okay?
Well, and that's too. There is an appeal process.
Hold on. Let's not get there yet. Yeah, I want to get there. So the IG, OPR, whomever does the investigation, and they give their results, their findings. Let's say he did it, he misused the car, he, had an improper relationship with the informant, the things we normally hear about. It goes back to OPR, and what do you do then?
Well, we're going to review it. Like I said, make sure it's complete. Like you said, quality control. And then we're just going to ship it over to the adjudication unit. And they're going to review it.
Okay. Right. And then what?
Well, they're going to review it and determine if, yes, there's evidence that there was serious misconduct here. And if there is, then they're going to go back in their files on precedent cases and give, the punishment is going to be based on what the precedent is. Now, actually, that changed a little bit when I got back there in 2004 because with the Caldwell Commission recommended posting what punishment was for certain things.
Right, I remember that. I worked on a project when I was back in inspections. And now I want to let's get to something because this is where I was getting at. They go back, they being OPR, whomever, and they make a recommendation of punishment, correct?
Correct.
It's a recommendation, but the system is not done yet, is it? There's another step in here, isn't there?
Well, if you're referring to the appeals, yes.
Is it an appeal or is it a hearing? Isn't the agent still going to get a hearing? Not an appeal of the sentence. He gets to make sort of a hearing in front of OPR because he's only had a chance now to answer the questions. He hasn't really had a chance to put on his own defense yet, has he?
Well, no, but he's only going to, the hearing is only going to come about if he appeals the punishment. So he has the right to appeal the punishment. Most people don't appeal the punishment, but when they do, then there's a hearing. Mm-hmm. But the subject of the case has to appeal whatever punishment he got. So he has that right to go back, and then they have a hearing. Now, see, I was never part of the hearing because I wasn't part of adjudication.
Right.
But you have to, be presented with whatever punishment you're going to get, and then you have the opportunity to appeal.
Okay.
And then there'd be a hearing. So yeah, you could bring in, I guess you could bring in, like you were saying, you could bring in your own witness or another witness, maybe that they didn't seem, for whatever reason wasn't interviewed. They could bring somebody with them, I guess.
And then they could change their mind, couldn't they? At that point, say, "Hey, this is new evidence."
Yes.
Right.
I don't have any kind of statistics. Just on my own personal experience, it didn't seem like things were overturned. I don't even remember a case where, I'm sure they were, but just my personal knowledge, I don't remember anything that got overturned.
Okay, I can think of one offhand right before I left. Yeah. A friend of mine, it was overturned when they got in there. Yeah. And again, because some of the investigation was a little strange in my opinion, and some other inconsistencies. But all right, I wanted to get that clear. Sure. So, and here's one. So let's get to McCabe now. So McCabe is accused of lying, and we all know, as you said last time, it's not the crime that gets you fired. It's what?
It's lack of candor.
Lack of candor, right? It's the cover-up. 99 times out of 100, I bet you've seen it, as we were discussing, the crime itself or the offense, the violation, wouldn't get someone fired, but when they lie about it, that's what gets them fired, right?
Yeah. Right. And I'd go into interviews and I try to tell people, it's like, this is probably not something that you're going to be fired on if you tell the truth. It's, I think the punishment's, going to be less than that. I can't, I couldn't promise anybody that, but I try to give them the idea that the last thing you want to do is not tell the truth, because that will definitely get you fired. So, I would always make sure I say, this might be something that it's not a fireable offense, but if you lie about it, well, it's going to be a no-brainer. They're going to fire you. Right. So, but you know what? You would tell people that, and they still lie.
I think there's a natural.
Don't want to fall on the sword. Yeah, they don't want to fall on the sword, and they try to mitigate it, and they add things into their statement that they just shouldn't have done, and it was sad. I saw a case. The worst one I had was, and it wasn't my case. I was helping another agent, because we always had two agents interviewing the subjects, and there was an Irish guy in Boston. I hate to say Irish like I'm stereotyping him, but the poor guy was a drinker, and I think he only had maybe 14 months to go. He was about 48 and a half, pushing 49, and he actually did a very serious misconduct. He did a hit and run. He found driving under the influence. He had been to the bar and he'd gotten drunk. I think he had a big problem with the Massachusetts state trooper. He was belligerent. So it was a bad situation. But probably if he had told the truth about what happened, he would have gotten the maximum punishment, which is 60 days off. 60 days of, suspension, no pay. But instead, he went into some story about, trying to mitigate it as if he was meeting a source at the bar. And it turned out, he just gave this story, it's like a hip pocket source, or, as an old source, but, it wasn't any of these things. It just, there was no documentation, so he couldn't back up in the files anything he had said. And I cringed when he started going into this, because I just knew he was setting himself up for, possibly getting fired. But he was really sticking to his story about this informant at the bar. And maybe it was a guy he knew, but there was no record of it anywhere.
Right.
So
I remember. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, he just gave adjudication no choice, because it just looked like a story. I mean, there could have been some truth to it, but it wasn't documented anywhere, so it was nothing that adjudication could find, and it wasn't even anything that he could turn up, like backing it up with any kind of paperwork. But, it's like he wanted to make an excuse for his bad behavior. But instead of getting the 60 days off, which he probably would have gotten, they fired him for the lack of candor.
Right. And you and I know, going back to the days of Director Free, the bright line, you do not lie, period.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was because that was a guy back in, the early 90s, some agent was drunk and killed a 10-year-old kid in the Bureau car. So then that's when the bright line came out. He didn't want any more of that.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, those are big issues. Again, we talk about an agent's credibility, what happens when one lies, and, we have a pretty bright line about it. So let's go now to McCabe, because I think that's what everyone wants to hear about, and what we all think. So your feeling is what? McCabe's firing, deputy director, obviously had a long, distinguished career, right? Something that we said probably could have been a mitigating circumstance. But your feeling is his firing was justified, not justified, or warranted, not warranted, meaning was it the right thing to do? We can always justify it, but was it the right thing to do? Your opinion?
Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, initially when I heard it, I thought, well, this is harsh, because the guy's only got a few days left, and they're considering firing him, and I'm very sympathetic to that kind of stuff, because I've seen the careers ruined, and like I said, the nice guy in Boston, he just so I felt bad. But then, when I started reading about it and listening to the news, it appeared to me that, and this is only what I'm reading in the newspapers and hearing on the news, that they did this case in OIG, and And I guess some of the issues were media leaks, but all that didn't even matter because you don't really, like I said, it might not have been a fireable offense, whatever they're investigating. But if he did in fact lie during the investigation with OIG, and if he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth, and then he didn't, and they had, I'm assuming that they have proof that he did lie. I mean, and so so taking that to sending it back to FBI adjudication unit, OPR adjudication unit, I don't think they had any choice but to fire him. I mean, because it would be inherently unfair to anybody else, I think, if he had not been fired. I mean, any other employee would be fired for that behavior.
Like a candor. All right, so let's again go through the process. So given his level, the number 2 man in the FBI, obviously OIG investigated this. OIG, right. You and I are not sure. I'm sorry?
Nobody at the FBI could have handled that case.
Right, obviously. Obviously.
Yes.
And I guess we'll see if we have time to talk about the politics, because you and I talked about even people in OPR worry about their career. That hasn't changed any, I imagine, since you and I have been gone. They still make decisions about people in the FBI. They could be upsetting friends of certain people, making decisions that are political, because we know they want to get promoted coming out of headquarters. And we know, irrespective of career boards and all that, SACs and higher ranking people in the Bureau pick their subordinates, right? So there's a certain amount of politics.
The badge lawsuit was supposed to change all that good old boy system.
Yeah, it did.
Remember the badge lawsuit?
Yeah,
it took them 10 years to implement the lawsuit, to where they, were giving everybody taking written tests for the
and they threw that one out right away.
Yeah,
remember,
but
didn't last.
They gave psychological interviews like later on, and it's still, I mean, in my experience, it still boiled down to who you knew.
Let me tell you something. When I was in SAC, and I remember I was meeting with my fellow SACs, as usual, I'm the black sheep, and we're talking about the career path process. We're always looking to change things. As you talk about reorg and all that time, we reorg to death. And everyone said, well, look, we all accept the fact that an SAC, Special Agent in Charge, should get to select his own or her ASAC, Assistant Agent in Charge. And I said, no, why would we have that authority? And we're saying, well, they got to work with you. I said, whoa. I became SAC. I walked in the field division. The 2 sitting ASACs were my ASACs. I don't get to remove them because I want somebody else. And if I get to choose somebody else, why should we have a process to begin with? If I can just pick whoever I want, they could give me, here are your most qualified, 1, 2, and 3, and I say, yeah, but I want number 5. What is the point of that? And I went through that trying to make ASAC. I remember I had an interview, and the SAC called up my SAC, said, hey, Tabman did really good, and I would have given him that job had I not already promised it to somebody else. What is that?
Yeah.
Is that a process? Yeah. It's all politics. So
who you know?
Yeah. Well, let's be honest. So even in OPR, as you said, you were concerned about your career. We had another guy there who had his career ruined because he made probably the right decisions. So we can't act like we're a group of virgins up there. Everyone's just doing all the right thing and no one has a little blood in their hands.
Can I tell you a quick story of my own personal experience? I'll try to make this
short. Yeah.
But when I came out of OPR the first time in 1997, I got hired to be the SSRA of Shreveport and Monroe, Louisiana, northern Louisiana. It's a great job. I was like the mini SAC up there. It was great. The problem that came about was the guy that selected me, the SAC that selected me, in the interim from when I was selected and by the time I got out to Shreveport, there was a new SAC that had arrived because the other guy got promoted and went back to be an assistant director in West Virginia at the CGIS. At the identification division, old identification division. So I had this new SAC. Well, my first day on the job, I had agents that were working for me in the RA saying, boy, this SAC, he doesn't like you. And I'm like, what? He doesn't even, I don't even know him. And he said, I said, I've never met him. And he said, well, he hates OPR, and he doesn't like the fact that he didn't pick you. So he's out. He's gunning for you. This was my first day on the job. And they said, Well, he had me confused with he was an ASAC in San Francisco, and my friend and I went out, and it was my friend's case from OPR. It was a fella that was a friend of this SAC's when he was ASAC in San Francisco. A guy stole an MP5, automatic machine gun. He stole it, and he hid it in his attic. Well, the case, he lied about it. The agent lied about it. He blamed it on a retired agent, said he must have taken it. And so anyway, this guy got fired because he did a polygraph, and it turned out, hey, you're lying. And then he finally admits, oh, it's in my attic. I stole it. Well, the ASAC, who's now my SAC in New Orleans, he argued with OPR the whole time because he wanted to open a criminal case on the retired agent, because this guy that actually ended up stealing it was a buddy of his, and he was trying to protect him. And then, so even after he knew he stole it, he hated OPR for getting his friend fired.
Right.
And then he thought, I wasn't even the case agent, I just helped. And he thought I was the case agent that got his friend fired, who was a thief and a liar.
Right. But that didn't seem to matter. Yeah.
My life was miserable in Shreveport. This guy made my life miserable.
And that they affect your career. If they don't recommend you for a position, on that phone call, you're not going anywhere.
Well, that's why I stepped out of management, because it was impossible. I can't even work here.
Right, and it's very distressing to hear your stories, even though I know they exist, and a listening audience is now getting a taste of sort of the dark side. And I'll tell one last story if I get back to McCabe. But when I was in inspections, we were having a meeting, and the current, or at the time rather, the deputy director gave a presentation, and in there he was justifying, when I get 2 applications, because he also hires for his office people to assist him and other career opportunities. If I get 2 applications, why should I just pick the person I know? Why should I pick someone who's unknown? Of course I'm going to select someone I know that I feel comfortable with. What's wrong with that? Kind of justifying that. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if that's how we're going to do things, why don't we just do away with the whole selection process to begin with, right? Just because you know someone doesn't mean they're better qualified. It just means you know them. And I heard that argument over and over again. And I said, boy, we're great justifiers. We could justify what we want, and they say, oh, but we're fair. When in fact, we're very unfair ourselves at times. But let's get to McCabe. So DOJ IG does the investigation. You and I just discussed, we're not quite sure their process may or may not be exactly like the FBI, right? We don't know that. We're not sure. They make their recommendation. They say he lied to us. Now, we don't know if he was, again, a chance of seeing a signed sworn statement. So we don't know that. It goes to OPR, Office of Professional Responsibility. You guys look at it and you think, okay, we're going to fire him for lying, right? That'd be the process. Now, once he gets that statement, says, hey, Deputy Director, we're going to fire you, then he has an opportunity for a hearing, correct? He
does.
So can we assume...
He didn't get to come back to work Monday, though.
Right. So could we assume then that since he appealed to the Attorney General that he had this hearing? Is it safe to make that assumption?
I would assume that he's going to, whatever the process is, the trouble with what you're saying is, I don't know, since it was investigated by DOJ OIG, would they have the hearing there? They wouldn't. It wouldn't be like the hearing that I was accustomed to, where it's just.
Well, why not?
OPR.
Because the decision is still that.
Yeah.
It's an FBI decision. OPR makes a decision to fire him, right? So this is internal to the FBI. OIG did the investigation, and the discipline's up to the FBI, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so it should be. Yeah, I guess OPR adjudication should be doing the hearing.
So he should. And they're just going to pay. Because the reason I was getting questions on social media from friends saying, hey, there's no indication he had a hearing. Again, and everyone thinks of a hearing as a chance to defend yourself, a chance to maybe, bring in witnesses, say things that maybe the investigators didn't allow.
You're bringing your attorney.
Bring an attorney, right? A true chance to defend yourself. You shouldn't be given that. So, again, so people ask me, I'm saying, I think it had to be part of the process. I don't know. I wasn't there. It's not in the media. But you would think that also, right? Before he went to the Attorney General, he should have been given a hearing, right?
Maybe he should have. I'm not sure. See, I'm not sure of the process when it's a case I don't know if he's going to have to go to federal court if that's going to be his hearing, or
but that's totally
I don't know
different.
how that's going to work.
I mean, that's completely different.
It would seem fair that he would have a hearing at OPR. I mean, I agree with you. He should.
He should have a chance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's just like you and I.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's just like you and I. We got to investigate someone. We catch him with the drugs, right? We got him red-handed. We go to the prosecutor, say this guy needs to go to jail for 10 years. The guy still has a chance to defend himself. We've done all the work. We may have interviewed him, and sometimes people get off. I mean, everyone should have a chance to defend themselves, other than just answering questions from the investigators who go in there with tunnel vision, right?
Well, yes and no, because what we're talking about here is not a criminal case with McCabe. No. We're talking about an administrative case.
Yeah, but you're talking about really the government taking such a serious action on this guy. He should be allowed something to defend himself. I personally, that's my feeling.
No, I agree with you, but I'm just not sure that they would even give him the opportunity because it's not civil service. You're not protected. It's accepted service. So, the FBI has a lot of power to fire people, and if they have, if they feel like they have the justification, they can do it. I mean,
and maybe you should explain to the audience that because people always ask about, all sorts of protections that FBI agents don't have. They don't have the same protections another employee might have. Correct?
Well, we're not civil servants. They call it accepted service, right? I mean, civil servants have protections. It's not easy to fire somebody from the Social Security Administration, for example.
Right.
But it's a lot easier if you're in accepted service, which is the FBI, non-civil service. I mean, like if you're a veteran, you have in the FBI. I think if you're a veteran, you have certain protections.
The Merit Protection Board, I think, is available to you, where it's not for someone else.
Right. I don't think McCabe was a veteran, from what I read.
No, probably not.
He wouldn't have that protection. So I'm not sure that. I mean, I agree with it. He should get a hearing, just like anybody else would. But
we're not sure. So he appealed to the Attorney General. The Attorney General made the decision to fire him. Something you agree with. What, if any, option could any of this be reversed? Could he be unfired? What could happen now? Is there any appeal process? I heard he has another appeal. Is there appeal beyond the Attorney General? Oh, let me ask you another question. Hold on.
Not unless he goes.
Wait, hold on. Before you answer that question, his appeal, if he wasn't the deputy director, who would the appeal be to? I'm assuming he went to the Attorney General because of his high level, and perhaps Director Ray recused himself. But who would he appeal to? Wouldn't it be the director otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, all the employees in the FBI, they're not appealing to the director, but because he's so high, it would have to be to the director. Because if he appeals to the assistant director in OPR or the inspection division, that's somebody that's subordinate to him. So I would assume it'd have to be the director. But see, I don't think there's any. Yeah, I think the man's going to have to go to federal court. And I don't know about all the retirement either.
I don't know either. That's complicated.
I don't know all those rules, but I think that he can still, get retirement pay based on he had the 20 years in. It's a lesser amount, or he can't collect. He can't collect it right away. He's got to wait till he's a certain age, 57 or 57. I don't know. I don't know
either. But let me ask you another question. Let's say they didn't have a decision. OPR didn't have a decision yet for whatever reason. They didn't pull out the inbox fast enough, and he retires. Could they go after him retroactively? Could they have gone after him retroactively in some way?
They could. If they, I mean, it seems, like I said before, it seems harsh because, I saw a couple cases where it was actually like with the old cell phone use and somebody was misusing his cell phone, and it was actually an SAC, I think, and there was DOJ fines back in the 90s for, I think it was like $10 a call for every time you misused this cell phone. And he was calling some girlfriend from across the country, so it was different than today's cell phones, obviously. Right. And you got all these extra charges. Well, he retired because he was a retirement age, and then they went after him to collect all these fines.
Okay, but that's fine.
It goes down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, I mean, no pun intended. That's fine. But could they do anything like in McCabe's case? Could they have, after he retired, heard it and said, "Okay, never mind. We are going to fire you now and deny your pension once you retired," or is it sort of crossing the county line and he was safe?
What I thought was going to happen was, well, he's just going to retire and then the case goes away, because that's what generally happens to agents that were, like my friend that was a unit chief. He was 54, and he wasn't under OPR. But there was a lot of individuals in the FBI that had their 20 years in, were over 50 already. They were retirement age, and if whatever the case was, if it was any administrative inquiry, the case was closed.
No, I understand that, but the reason I'm asking is I heard on some of the news channels there, some of the network news, some of our former colleagues who were out of the talking heads, someone stating that they still could have gone after him retroactively, and I didn't know if that was correct or not. That's why I was asking you.
Oh, no, I think that is correct. I think that's correct. But,
what can they do? What can they do retroactively? Once he retires, what can they do?
Well, yeah, it's that the money is your pension, unless they're going to go after your pension.
For
like
what?
If they just went through the case and tried to take away your pension. But I don't know what they could do, because, like I said, it was the cases that I was familiar with. It involved money that he would have owed.
Right, which is something different than actually disciplining them or.
Yeah, that's different.
Yeah,
so
right.
I mean, I just never heard anything like this. I actually never heard of it.
I asked because I heard someone mention it, and I wasn't sure myself. I said, I was going to ask you when you came on the show. I've been holding that question.
Well, sorry, no, I don't. I mean, this is such a unique case. A deputy director. It's like, I've never seen anything like it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right, and I guess there's some questions there. He's saying it was a misunderstanding, and that's why the whole process to me is more important. I'd love to see, what exactly did DOJ do? Again, did he get a chance to sign a statement? I think that'd be a big issue, right? He's saying there's misunderstanding, but if he signs something,
Yeah, because as you and I know, I mean, you can interview somebody, and then if you write it in your own report, and that's, mistakes can be made. I mean, agents aren't perfect, or investigators aren't perfect, and it is possible that if it was done that way, maybe something was misconstrued. But for me, I can't imagine it was done that way. Just from my experience, and I never really did read in the newspaper or here on the news that he gave a signed sworn statement. So that bothers me a little.
Right, and that's what I wanted to ask you, because I was getting those questions from friends and and social media saying what happened, how was it investigated? Meaning, did he give a statement? Did he have a hearing? And I just didn't have the answers for that, because I just don't know.
I mean, OIG is going to release this. In fact, I'm not sure that I saw in the news that they released something today, but I don't know if they're going to release those kind of details where if they're going to say in the report that he gave a signed sworn statement, and then we found that he lied, or how they're going to turn. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. All right, well, I wanted to get everyone's perspective, so thank you so much. You gave us a lot of good insight into the FBI, probably more than maybe you wanted to give, or either one of us wanted to admit to, on there. And I think it'll give people a good understanding of how the process works. And we're going to hear from someone else who has a little different perspective than you. So, Bill, thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming on twice, making up for our technical issues last week. I really appreciate it. And let's you and I stay. I'm sorry?
I say no problem. I enjoyed it.
That's great. Let's you and I stay in touch now that we connected and got to know each other. All right?
Well, I will, but I just want to say one thing. I actually wrote a book, and, present company excluded, because I know you're an SAC, and I'm sure you were a great guy. But I did write
I think a lot of my office would disagree with you, but that's all right. Go ahead.
Well, there's nothing in my book about you. Let's put it that way. But I wrote a book about my experiences, and it's called The FBI They Eat Their Young. It's a memoir, but it kind of touches on the problems with executive management and some vindictiveness and retaliation and things of that went on. And there's actually a couple chapters in the book about, my 2 tours at OPR. So if somebody really wanted to understand OPR and see how political it was and the retaliation that went on, I mean, they could read my book and
no, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. I apologize for not asking for that. I meant to do that. And
Hey,
spell your last name for everybody so they know where to find your book.
it's on Amazon and Kindle.
Right, and your last name Larsh.
SH.
Right. Just for
Yeah.
the record here, folks, Bill and I did not know each other during our career in the FBI, so that could be why. So, all right, the FBI, They Eat Their Young by Bill Larsh, William Larsh. Find that on Amazon. Thank you so much, buddy, and we'll be in touch. I appreciate it.
Okay, Mike. Great talking to you. Bye-bye now.
Take care, man. Thanks. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for hearing that part of the show tonight. That was a former FBI supervisory special agent who worked in OPR. He gave us, I think, some very honest insight into how OPR works and some of the politics within the FBI. I think he gave a fair statement, and I think it was kind of hard for him to do that, but he did it anyway. Now we're going to take a little break. When we come back, we're going to hear from an former assistant United States attorney who has a little different perspective on the McCabe case. So stick around for just a minute, and we'll pick the show up then. Thank you so much. And remember, after the show, please go on to YouTube and click the little icon and become a subscriber. We are this close from having the numbers we need. And like us on Facebook. All right, stick around, everybody. Thank you. Hi, I'm Michael Tabman, President of DOT Compliance Services. After 24 years in the FBI and 3 years as a police officer, I know how to navigate complex rules and regulations. And I know you're worried about the scammers you've heard about. Don't worry, I've faced much tougher criminals. Allow DOT Compliance Services to handle your compliance matters and keep you on the road making money, not out of service paying steep fines. Give us a call. We've got you back. Please welcome to the show Patrick Cotter. He's a former United States attorney from the Eastern District of New York and now an attorney in private practice. Patrick, thank you for joining us tonight.
I'm glad to be here.
Could you just tell us a little bit about your background in the United States Attorney's Office and what you did there?
Yes, I was in the strike force on organized crime for the Department of Justice for the last 3 years of that organization. I was based in the Brooklyn office, Eastern District, New York. And then when the strike force was melded into the U.S. Attorney's offices, I became an assistant U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of New York, continuing to work on organized crime cases for another 3 or 4 years.
Were you part of the John Gotti prosecution?
I was. I was lucky enough to be part of the successful prosecution of John Gotti Sr., along with a team of very good prosecutors, FBI agents, IRS agents, etc.
Right. I'm glad we distinguished the fact it was a successful prosecution, since I think there were two
Right.
others that were not. And just for the record, you and I did not know each other before today, but we just found out that I was working narcotics at the Queen's office the same time you were there in the Eastern District of New York, and we know some of the same people, right?
Indeed. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We didn't know that beforehand, so just for the record, right?
No.
All right. So let's get to the disciplinary process in the FBI and Department of Justice, vis-a-vis the Andrew McCabe firing. And just so everyone understands, the FBI is a component of the Department of Justice, but in the field, the FBI does not answer to the Department of Justice, the U.S. attorneys. We're a separate entity. The hierarchy is really at the headquarters level, where the director answers to the Attorney General, right?
Right.
Okay, so everyone understands that, how we fall into it, from a political and hierarchical perspective. Are you familiar with the DOJ IG office?
Not in any detail. I never worked there, and I'm happy to say I never had any disciplinary issues when I was there. So I do not claim to be any kind of an expert about how the IG works.
Okay, but in this process here, we know that the IG office did the investigation of McCabe because of his high-level ranking within the FBI, right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so they would do an investigation and they would turn it back over to the FBI, and you're probably not familiar with the internal process in the FBI, how these decisions are made.
Not in any great detail, no.
All right.
I did watch some from afar. I watched some disciplinary processes against some FBI agents while I was in the government.
And did you draw any opinions from watching from the outside looking in?
Not particularly. I thought each case stood on its own merits.
Okay, you didn't have any problems with politics or believing they were fair or unfair. You felt they were generally
fair.
There
weren't any politics involved. in those
There weren't any
cases. There weren't any politics.
understand, right. Okay, but you have a
Right.
different opinion. You've expressed a different opinion on the McCabe firing. Why is that?
I think that it's incredibly suspicious that McCabe received a termination as a result of the inquiry, given the context, and I'm troubled by it. And one of the things, I don't know about you, but I certainly learned in law enforcement and also just working in criminal law for 36 years, one way and another, is that I'm always suspicious of unusual circumstances and coincidences. I don't really believe in too many coincidences, and I think it's a hell of a coincidence that a guy who becomes the target of unprecedented public vitriolic attacks by the President of the United States, and is just reamed out repeatedly because of his wife and because of his cooperation with the Mueller investigation and his perceived closeness or allegiance with James Comey, who was also fired by this president. I find it disturbing that on the basis of what we're told, and conceitedly nobody's seen the IG report outside the government, but what we're told is the fact that he was less than candid about some contacts with the press, when everybody knows that his contacts with the press were public, they were approved in advance. So we don't know exactly what the lack of candor was, but in a situation such as this, where there's no allegation that he obstructed justice, there's no allegation that he did something that impaired a prosecution or an investigation. 22 years, I believe, of really exemplary service, and 2 days before he's to retire, he is summarily fired. I find that an incredible coincidence, and I don't trust coincidences, and I suspect that there was politics involved. I can't prove it. I'm not indicting anybody. I don't have the authority, and I don't have the evidence. But I find it incredibly suspicious, particularly when I know of other disciplinary actions that could have been taken. He could have had his rating reduced. There were other disciplinary steps they could have taken, and it just seems incredibly suspicious to me that in this context they impose what amounts to, in their world, the death penalty on this guy for this allegation.
Right. And you make a point that I'm glad you make, and I'm talking to you for audience sake. We're having this conversation separate from our other guest that we're having on tonight. That a lot of people don't realize it wasn't firing or nothing. There's a whole gamut of disciplinary actions they could take.
Exactly.
Just short of that. Now, one of the things we hear them say is his contacts with the media. From my understanding, and I don't know if either you and I could say this for sure, is as the deputy director, he had the authority to make those contacts with the media. It was within his decision-making authority to do that. So, and that seems to make sense to me. He was the number 2 man in the FBI. I would imagine he did have that authority. So that contact probably sounds to me legitimate. Now comes a question of, was he less than candid? Now, does that sound suspicious, that terminology, less than candid, as opposed to saying he lied or he was untruthful? Does that sound like they're hedging or fudging? Or is that just maybe the terminology?
No. I think it's a term of art.
Mm-hmm.
I will confess I'm an attorney, so we're very careful about our words. But whoever came out with that less than candid is also an attorney, I suspect, and they're very careful about their words. And they didn't accuse him of lying. They didn't accuse him of violating 18 U.S.C. 1001, making a false statement to a government agent, which if he had lied, they could have. Less than candid. Less than candid is the kind of language that I have seen over the years used when you've got a witness who doesn't lie but allegedly failed to mention something, or who put their spin on what happened. and that it isn't actually a lie, but reasonable people could differ, but I, as the investigator, believe you're being less than candid with me. You said you knew him, and in fact, it's our information that you were very good friends with him. That's, I think, an example of less than candid. It troubles me that a person who, as you point out quite correctly, had the authority to do this, and as I understand it from statements made by Mr. McCabe's counsel, in fact cleared his contacts with other people. This wasn't something he did on his own and didn't tell anybody. And then he's, a significant period of time afterwards, he's interviewed about it, and again, according to his attorneys and his own statements, they more than once apparently went back in one form or another to the investigators trying to clarify statements. I know from my own personal experience of being on both sides of the table, interviewing witnesses and also having my clients interviewed, that is a very common thing. That is a very common thing. Your client is interviewed. Afterwards, you're talking with them. They say, gosh, you know, I think I may have got that wrong, or do you think that they understood what I meant when I said this? And you go back. You go back in a letter. You have a second meeting. You clarify it, etc. I note, by the way, in today's paper, I read that Attorney General Sessions twice had to go back to Congress to clarify his testimony before Congress, where he said things that I suppose a reasonable person could say exhibited less than candor, full candor, and then he was confronted with the fact that some of the things he said didn't appear to be true, and he went back twice to clarify and to clear the record, and that's very common. So it just strikes me that language and also the fact that there were these subsequent meetings suggests to me that there may be a disagreement. The investigator may feel that I don't accept your interpretation of what you did or whatever. But again, it simply doesn't rise to the level of the kind of violation that would normally, in my opinion, should, and I think does, result in somebody being terminated after 22 years. Again, okay. I point out, and I think this is very important, no investigation was endangered by his statements. No case had to be dismissed. No conviction was reversed. Those are, of course, the great sins. Those are the great sins. But I find this very disturbing.
Okay, now, you've made a point about interviewing someone, as you've done, witnesses and defendants and whomever. And I want to draw a distinction here, if you agree or disagree. If you were interviewing McCabe about something someone else did, maybe what the director did, and he lied about that, would you see that differently, as you said, when he's interviewed about himself? Because we tend to interpret what we do in a different light. And it's a natural tendency to put, a positive spin on it, or saying, well, this is what I was thinking, this is why I did it. And someone else may not understand your perspective or that person's perspective and their own motivation. But they may be honestly, perhaps dishonestly, but maybe honestly, just seeing it from their own framework. And so it's not necessarily a lie, but their own way they're viewing what they did and why they did what they did, or why they said what they said. Would you agree with that when you're talking about yourself, it's a little different than when you're talking about somebody else?
Absolutely. And it depends on the question. And again, we're all at a disadvantage because we haven't seen the IG report. So we don't know what exact statement they're claiming was less than candid. But if it's a question of explaining your motivation, if it's a question of explaining what you understood or what you perceived an event or a situation to be, absolutely. Those kinds of disagreements between reasonable people happen every day. Two people could look at a situation. One person was involved, the other one was watching from the outside. The person involved felt that it was a misunderstanding between two people. The person from the outside said, no, I thought really you were the aggressor in that situation. Both of them, in my opinion, could probably pass a lie detector because they're both telling the truth, but they perceived it differently because of where they were in the situation, as you say, when you're talking about yourself. Now, if it turns out that he was less than candid about, who was in the meeting, There were 3 people present, and in fact, he only said 2. Well, that's a little different because that's a factual thing, and we can look at that. But I think if he had done that, we wouldn't be getting this very tepid language about less than candid.
Right.
I think they'd say, hey, he lied about Mr. Jones being present at the meeting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, good. I was just saying, what I find not funny in a humorous way, when we talk about interview and interrogation, I know when I teach a class, we always talk about, you'll see if you go online, you ask people, what are some of the tricks to interview and interrogation? And you'll always see someone say, oh, ask them something a little differently, and then just see if they give the same answer. And if they give a different answer, someone's lying once they change their answer. But my response always is, if you ask me a question in a little different manner, I'm going to answer it in a little different manner, because the different words don't have the exact same meaning. And I think, sometimes lying, and I've seen that before, the guy changed his story. Well, that question wasn't exactly the same. And can you see that happening in this kind of investigation?
Oh, I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I spent many years as a federal prosecutor. And in my world, that happens constantly. I mean, on direct examination, when the friendly lawyer is talking to friendly witness, the question of how an event happened is asked in a certain way, and it gets a certain kind of response. On cross, essentially the same question is asked, but it's asked in a very different way. It's asked in a leading way. It's asked in an aggressive way. It's asked in an accusatory way. It's asked in a sarcastic way. So absolutely, a lot of the art of being a trial lawyer is about how you ask the question. It's not the question; it's how you ask it. So absolutely, you're asking it in a different way because you're trying to elicit a different response.
Right, and then you get it, and you say, "Aha, you're lying," right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, when the and that's fair, I guess, in a trial because essentially the jury gets to see that. I've got a sign around my neck that says prosecutor, so everybody knows, what my bias is, if you will, or defense attorney. But it's absolutely true that it occurs in all circumstances. So how you ask the question, how you perceive the answer, as you know, and I mean no disrespect here, but as you know, when an investigator, whether it's an FBI agent or an IG investigator or a lawyer, you're having a conversation, you're interviewing somebody. If you're not videotaping it, if you're not taping it, you're making notes. Mm-hmm. And most investigators are not taking dictation. They're writing down, I would argue almost all the time, what they honestly perceive and recollect the response was. But it's not dictation, and that's another big issue. I sometimes tell clients who say, well, what if the FBI shows up at my house? I said, give them my name. And, oh, are you saying we will never talk to them? I'm saying, no, we will talk to them. But let's talk to them in a context and in a way that we can make sure that everything you say is accurately taken down and explained, and that they understand what you're saying. If you're just having a conversation with them on your doorstep early in the morning, that may not be the best way to convey your thoughts fully, accurately, and get them recorded fully and accurately. So there are a lot of ways that interviewers can get a wrong idea about what a witness is saying. Now, it's absolutely true. Sometimes witnesses aren't candid, and sometimes witnesses don't tell the truth. But I've seen many, too many to count, instances where really what's happening is a mistake in communication.
I can tell you, and I think many agents and detectives will at least admit to themselves, we go in pairs, probably most law enforcement does when they do an interview, and one takes notes while the other one's sort of the lead investigator. And I can recall my own. We would go back and sit down and we'd start writing our 302 of the notes, and there's still disagreement about what was said. I don't remember that.
Sure.
And even though it was written down, that we have to sort of come to an understanding as to what we're going to write that satisfies our collective memory as to what occurred. So there's a lot of flaws in that system. Doesn't mean it's always wrong or always right, but we have to understand it is imperfect, like most things in life. Let's get to the politics of this thing. So as you said in the very beginning, we have a president who's been personally hammering this guy. I myself have gone on my own blogs, my own show, and I think that Comey mishandled some ways. I think McCabe should have been recused from the Hillary Clinton case, from moment one and continuing on. I'm not sure where FBI legal counsel was on that. What is your opinion on his recusal? Just by the mere fact, his wife was allowed to run for office. She was allowed to take the money. But I think there's a message there that just to make things clean, nothing on the Hillary Clinton matter should have crossed his desk from the beginning to end. Your thoughts?
I tend to agree with you. I think if he had called me, right, if he had just said, "Oh, Pat, you're a lawyer. Here's what's happened. My wife received some funding from the Democrats, and I've now got this case that's turned up on my desk involving Hillary Clinton. What do you think?" And I'd say, as I tell clients all the time, I said, do the safest thing. Do the thing that nobody could reproach you for. And in that case, it would have been to recuse himself. Now, as you say, I don't know what actually happened. I don't know if he went to FBI general counsel and he got an opinion. I don't know. But if you're asking me, would the smarter, safer thing have been to recuse yourself? Absolutely.
Yeah, I've read that after his wife lost the election, then he was clear to work in there. And again, that's only what I've read. And to me, that sounds like a pretty poor decision. Once you're out, you should stay out of it. There's no room for reentry.
It's just not smart. It's just not smart. I'm not making a judgment on an ethics issue. I'm saying from a strategic point of view, it's not smart. Why would you put yourself in that position?
Exactly. The appearance.
Raise that allegation. The appearance, yeah. Right? You have to be beyond question. And the higher you go in any organization, I think that's true. But I know from years and years of working with FBI agents that they absolutely understand that. They understand that their integrity is everything. Once you lose your integrity, you lose 90% of your power, and rightly so. And I think that he should have been savvy enough, frankly, to have pulled out. Now, having said that, it sounds, at least we don't know yet, but it sounds like he somehow got an okay to do it. It's unfortunate that he did, and it's unfortunate that he took that advice. But that's a separate issue. From
right, it is a separate issue, and I think the FBI is going to need to do a little introspection on that decision. So let's go to the politics. We have the president tweeting out about this one particular person. I've had some agents, on my blogs, on social media say, yeah, that's okay. He's allowed to be mad about this. Let's forget the legality of it. Is that something the president should be doing?
Well, it's funny. We were just talking about McCabe should have maintained a position that would have allowed him to stay beyond reproach. He shouldn't have put himself in a position where people could question his motives. I think the president has, if anything, an even higher obligation, doesn't he? He's the president of everybody. He's supposed to be, he's the chief law enforcement officer in a sense. He's the commander in chief. He's the head of the executive branch, which includes the FBI. He should not be engaging in personal attacks. And the attacks are not a situation where the president's lawyer is coming out and making comments like that. I think that's perhaps appropriate. I'm not talking about the president sending a memo to the head of the Department of Justice or the head of the FBI saying, hey, I have some questions about what this person is doing. This is somebody who's engaging in a public relations campaign to attack the man personally. It's just unprecedented, no pun intended. But it's on top of everything else. Again, if I was the president's lawyer, I'd say, for the love of God, don't do that. Why would you do that? You make yourself look bad. And this is exactly what we're talking about. Is the ultimate example. He attacks this guy on his Twitter, and then later a decision is made to fire the guy. And of course, people would have to be, in my opinion, stupid not to ask a question whether the two are connected.
Right, we may not be having this conversation if he hadn't done that.
Right, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If he had handled it in a professional way, if he had handled it in the way an executive officer of any organization should handle these kinds of issues, we wouldn't be having these conversations. And then the IG report could stand or fall on its own merits. But no matter what that IG report says, I guarantee you the questions surrounding the termination of McCabe will never cease, because the president has injected himself into this, and it is just darn hard for a lot of people, and myself included, to believe that didn't put a thumb on the scale at some point, right, and result in what we've seen with the death penalty, as it were, being imposed on McCabe.
Just for the audience's sake, I know if anyone's critical of the president, can say, "Oh, you're just an anti-Trumper." Just for the record, I was critical of President Obama when he came out and sort of made a decision as to whether law enforcement acted correctly in certain circumstances. I felt he should have stayed out of that. He didn't have all the facts, and it really wasn't his place to make that kind of statement. So just
well, I think any elected official, I think any elected official should stay out of judicial proceedings until they are finally resolved. If the Supreme Court comes down with an opinion, I think it's fine for the president afterwards to say, well, I respectfully disagree or whatever. But particularly in law enforcement situations where there's been an event, a shooting, an arrest, whatever, and the case is by definition unresolved, it just happened, I don't think the president or any elected official, I don't think mayors, I don't think aldermen, I don't think anybody should be going into the media and the public and having opinions one way or the other. I don't think they should come out and say, I support the police officer. I'm sure he had a reason to shoot that person. I think that's just as bad as somebody got up and say, I think that police officer was unjustified in shooting that person. The reality is you don't know, and you shouldn't be giving an opinion that you don't know has a good basis. And there's a judicial process. You, above all people, as an elected official, should respect that, and by example, show all the citizens that what we do is we let our legal system work, and then we decide. We don't jump the gun and try to decide it in the press.
Right. And I think we have to distinguish also, you and I could come on the media, my show here, and we're just talking heads. But when you have a public official, we have to remember the effect that authority has on people. We tend to respect and believe authority. And when they say something without all the facts, people are forming decisions based just on that statement without having all the facts.
Well, and by definition, it's political. So when a political person who has a political following makes a statement about a case that's working its way through the system, what they're doing is they're invoking their political authority and influence over people. And that's not right. Two citizens who don't have that. I mean, there's no political party that frankly cares what Pat Cotter says. Mm-hmm. I don't have thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people who voted for me for anything, who are going to be influenced by what I say. I give my opinion. If my fellow citizens think it's a good opinion, okay, maybe it affects them. If they think it's a bad opinion, they say, well, who's that idiot? And they move on. But it's very different, you're right, when a political figure who has these people who by definition have voted for them and are influenced by them to come out and make statements like that.
Right. Now, I don't know if you read recently, because we talked about Sessions. He was sort of the master. I cannot recall. But I think late yesterday, they were reporting that now McCabe apparently gave authority to open an investigation into whether Sessions lied under oath. Have you seen that
I read
coverage?
That.
All right. What is the effect of that now?
Well, we don't know, right? I mean, I suppose part of it is one of the questions that'll be answered, I'm sure, in the next days and weeks. Did Sessions know? I mean, as you know, and I know.
His office is claiming he did not know.
Okay. Well, I mean, if that's true, then I suppose it didn't have any impact. In other words, if it was just something that came up in an investigation, Sessions was completely oblivious to it, then I think a logic would suggest it didn't have any impact on whatever decision-making Sessions contributed to the McCabe situation.
But if you were McCabe and you were his legal team, did you believe that he didn't know? That Sessions did not know? Would you accept that answer?
Oh, not on face value. Absolutely not. I mean, and even as a citizen, to be blunt, I don't accept it at face value. I'm going to keep an open mind. I'm willing to be educated. But as you point out, and I mean no disrespect to Mr. Sessions, but the record is very clear. This is a guy who, as I mentioned earlier, not only when he testified before Congress did he repeatedly claim not to remember important things, but he actually got several very important things wrong. He just testified incorrectly. Now, he later came back and said it was an honest mistake and I forgot or I didn't understand the question or whatever. And I'm willing to listen to that, but absolutely not would I take it at face value. Oh, you know, Mr. Sessions says today he doesn't think he knew that he was being investigated by McCabe. Well, you know, he also forgot meeting the ambassador from Russia. So, you know, and this is when he was under oath in front of the United States Congress on camera being asked by a senator about connections with the Russians, and he forgot that he met the Russian ambassador. So, I mean, this is a guy who has earned a certain amount of skepticism.
Okay, and you know, talking to many of my colleagues and seeing what they're saying on social media and the other talking heads, a lot of them say, hey, he lied. That is a fireable offense in the FBI. He's got to be held accountable. But if I'm understanding you correctly, you're not disagreeing with that concept. What you're saying here is the wording that was used leads us to believe that maybe he didn't outright lie and didn't deserve, as you put it, this death penalty, which is about the worst sanction you could have as an FBI agent. Is that correct?
Right. And I would add, I think it matters what you lie about. And I mean that because, I mean, there are some falsehoods that are important. If I lie about my weight or if I lie about, you know, whether I you know, had lunch with somebody because it's embarrassing that I had lunch with somebody, that's one thing. And I'm not saying it's okay to lie about that. If it comes up in an investigation, as I tell my clients, if you're going to talk to them, you've got to tell them the absolute truth. But there's a difference between lying about that sort of thing and lying about something that goes to the heart of what the FBI does, something important to his position and his functioning and something central to the mission of the FBI. Now, if you lie, like I said, if you lie about something and it ends up interfering with or almost interfering with or appears to have been intended to interfere with an investigation of crime or something like that, if it causes the FBI to have to, you know, retract a statement or something, that's huge. And that's a big lie, and you're absolutely right. Then perhaps the ultimate punishment is appropriate. But there is no justice without proportion. Okay, that's a principle of our legal system. That's why we don't cut off the hands of thieves, right? You know, even if they just stole a loaf of bread. I mean, there is no justice without proportion. And with all due respect to your commentators, anybody who says, if he lied, then he should be fired, that's you're entitled to your opinion, but recognize that position is not just. By definition, it is not just.
Interesting.
Justice has to be proportional.
Interesting you say that because just as you mentioned, I'm thinking to myself, there's agents and other, you know, probably DOJ personnel who are probably disagreeing with you right now, you know, saying just what you said. He lied, he's out. So you raised an interesting point. Let's go to the last topic here. Now that it's all said and done, he's been fired. Do you know, I don't, do you know, is there any recourse? Could this be undone if someone was to look at this and say this was unjust, maybe for the reasons you stated or for some other reasons? Can a firing be undone, or is it just a matter he'd have to try to sue the FBI and DOJ, which we know is very difficult? What are the options for Andrew McCabe?
Well, I have to admit, this is not an area in which I have experience, but it's my understanding that there is an appeal board that he can go to and claim that his termination was inconsistent with the procedures and rules followed in these kind of situations. I don't know enough about the details of how he was interviewed, when, notices, all that sort of thing. So I don't know whether that kind of an appeal goes anywhere. He could bring, I suppose, as I always tell people, anybody can sue anybody for anything. It doesn't mean you're going to win. He could bring a lawsuit, I suppose, if he wants to allege that there was some inappropriate backdoor pressure placed on him, which would be an interesting lawsuit, if only because of the discovery and deposition process. Again, Mr. Sessions and other people would be under oath being asked about to explain exactly who they talked to and how many of the president's tweets they read and what were the impact of the tweets on their decision-making process, and then again all the details about how the questions were asked and who wrote down the answers and all that sort of thing. So I think he has a couple options. I think it's very tough to get it reversed. I think his better option, and it's been in the press, his better option is perhaps to, if he can, acquire a sufficient number of extra days in federal employment and then appeal that he's satisfied enough time to get his pension.
Yeah, I don't think that'll work because we work as 1811s. Now I don't know if he'd be able to get that position.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. But I think he actually has a better shot trying to go down that road a little bit than he might be the other way.
Right. All right. Well, I think we've covered a wide range. Any other closing comments you want to make before we finish off this conversation?
No. I want to be clear. I'm not presuming that the IG doesn't have some basis for what they're recommending, but I do think that as people who've worked in law enforcement, people like yourself and many of your listeners, I think if they apply the same sort of appropriate skepticism that they employ in their profession or in their professional lives, I think the circumstances and the coincidences in this case scream out for a very healthy dose of skepticism. And I think people should not close their minds off to the possibility that politics had a great deal to do with this, because if it was in any other context, it was a case they were investigating, I don't think they would do that.
All right, that's terrific. Patrick, you've raised some great points for us to think about. I appreciate that. Thank you for connecting with me right before we did the show. I appreciate that as well. And let's stay in touch on social media.
Absolutely.
And when I'm up in New York, I'm going to let you buy me a beer. How does that sound?
Well, when you're in Chicago.
Oh, you're in Chicago. I'm sorry. That's right. I thought you were back in New York. I'm even closer to Chicago.
I'll absolutely buy your beer when you get to town.
All right, buddy. It's been great. Thank you so much.
All right. You take care. I enjoyed it.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, everybody. That was a commentary from Patrick Cotter, a former United States attorney, now an attorney in private practice.